千里之行，始于足下。A journey of 1,000 miles begins beneath the feet. We now gather in the Tao to travel the journey together. Welcome to Tao Talks with Derek Lin, where we take a deep dive into the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu. I would like to extend a warm welcome to you. Thank you for joining us. I would like to invite you to center your thoughts and direct your attention to this moment in time, to the here and now, to be fully present and mindfully aware as we all ready ourselves for this sacred process in the Tao with one another. Now, without further ado, let us continue with Tao Te Ching, chapter 16. As I mentioned last time, the title of this chapter, Returning to Nature, requires further explanation. Nature, in this case, has a particular meaning that may not be immediately apparent. It is not talking about nature as in the great outdoors. Rather, it is referring to the nature of a human being, specifically pointing to your true original nature as a spiritual being, rather than just a physical entity. This is drawn from line 7 of this chapter, which speaks to returning to one's original nature when one's life comes to an end. This means going back to being who you really are, instead of the identity that you assume while here in the material world. This, of course, is an absolutely profound topic, and the full extent of it is not at all obvious from a surface level translation. That is why it is especially worthwhile for us to go over this chapter in detail. Here's how the chapter looks. This is where we started looking at. Last time, a chapter with 17 lines, which we were able to divide into 3 major sections. Here's how the 3 sections look. The first section, which we were able to go over last time, goes from line 1 to line 5. It is about Lao Tzu getting into the utmost emptiness and tranquility in his mind in order to observe the myriad things out in nature from this unattached perspective. The first 2 lines are of special significance as introductory lines, often quoted, and therefore they form a subsection by themselves, as you can see, representing by a dividing line that is shorter than the major lines for the major sections. So the first section, Lao Tzu watched how all the living things of the world follow the cycles of nature, actively living their lives, but eventually returning to their roots when life comes to an end. In the sections we will discuss today, Lao Tzu goes from nature to nature. That is, he makes the connection from the natural world to the true nature of you and me. Section 2 and 3 are his insights based on this contemplation. as a recap, last time we covered the first concept. This was about the ultimate emptiness. Lao Tzu starts out saying, attain the ultimate emptiness. This is about emptying the mind of all non-essential thoughts. That is, the noise, the preconceptions, the biases, distracting desires, and of course, the ego. The practice of emptying the mind is central to the Tao, as well as the Zen. In the Zen tradition, which we were able to also cover last time, this is a parallel concept illustrating the ultimate emptiness. In the Zen tradition, the metaphor of a clear mirror is presented to represent the human mind. So the idea from the sixth patriarch of Zen Buddhism is that the way we deal with the external world, the world at large, it's the world of dust. Dust representing all the things we imagine that we want in the material world, but don't actually need. All the distractions, they land on the clear mirror like dust motes. Over time, it makes the mirror less clear. The mirror becomes very dusty. It requires cleaning. So one practitioner of the Zen tradition advocated that the mirror must be constantly cleaned by wiping it down. But Huineng, the sixth patriarch, said that there is a better way, the way of the ultimate emptiness. That is, you let go of your attachments and egocentric thoughts. This causes the mirror, that is the mind, to become intangible. It's there and yet it's not. When it is not tangible, dust no longer has the power to land on it, to obscure it, to make it dusty. It just passes right through. That is the ultimate emptiness. And this is what we ended our discussion last time. Now, let's continue on into 16 by going to the next line. The next line that complements ultimate emptiness is the truest tranquility. The line says, hold on to the truest tranquility. So this poetically is in the construction that matches attain the ultimate emptiness. And it continues the thoughts on stillness, not just from the first line, but from the previous chapter, 15. And the reason why this is important is because there's always that internal turmoil in one's mind. It interferes with our ability to see clearly. When you cannot think clearly, you cannot see in the physical sense and the spiritual sense. It is only when you quiet down this mental chatter, the noise within, that you regain your clarity. You are not so distracted, you can focus, you can concentrate, you can see better and understand what you see much better than before. So the bottom line, clarity of perception will give you the accurate, insightful observations. So this is the reason why Lao Tzu says that we must attain that ultimate emptiness and hold on to the truest tranquility prior to beginning your observation of anything. He's using nature as a starting point, but that's not where he ends. Before we get to that, let's talk about the truest tranquility. In this slide, I use the image of the Buddha because we usually associate meditation with Buddhism. However, it should be noted that for centuries before Buddhism spread to ancient China, Tao sages had already explored and understood the importance of the meditative practice. And we can see this in the words from Lao Tzu, not just in this chapter, but also other chapters of the Tao Te Ching as well. They all reference what is basically the silence of your mind. And we need to do this because the material world is full of noise. More importantly, not just the material world, but the internal world of the mind oftentimes is full of noise. Internal chatter, as I said. Now, when it comes to the external versus the internal, the distinction is that you and I, we all have limited control over the external. We can move ourselves to a quiet place, but if we happen to be somewhere that is noisy, we may or may not be able to do something about it. So our control over the environment can sometimes be limited. On the other hand, when it comes to the internal world, the world of your mind, internally, you have complete control. You can do anything with your mind. You can train your mind for better, higher level mastery to be able to have your mind do what you want it to do. So to hold on to this Tao, the Tao of tranquility, is to exercise that internal mastery so you can always have your internal peace and quiet, regardless of what is happening on the outside. So the better way is to attain the truest tranquility regardless of where you are, exercising your mastery over the senses. There may be noise and distractions on the outside, but the mind with absolute control does not need to be affected by the external. So when you have that external stimuli, it doesn't matter because they can no longer affect the internal essence. Of course, it would take practice to be able to attain this level of internal mastery. But when you are able to get there, you have what Lao Tzu calls hold on to the truest tranquility. A note as well between the similarities between Buddhist Dharma and Taoist philosophy. Many people have noted that the two are very similar. There are parallel concepts that we have seen, like in the previous slide about the ultimate emptiness. This is because both Buddhism and Taoism reflect the same spiritual truths underlying reality. So in that sense, they are one. Moving on to the next line. Here we come to 万物, these two characters that are frequently used in the Tao Te Ching. Breaking it down, the first character there, 1, it means 10,000. So 万物 has been translated as 10,000 things. In this context, the meaning of 10,000 is not all. It is not a literal 10,000. It's like when we say thanks a million, or I told you 100 times. In those expressions, we do not mean literally a million. We mean thanks much. And we don't mean literally I've told you 100 times. We mean I told you many times. So it's the same here. 10,000 is not 10,000. It means all, numerous, everyone. Therefore, all things or myriad things would be the more accurate and better translation. It would be different if in English we have an expression for 10,000 things, meaning many things or all things. It is not part of English. At the moment, it is still just those who practice the Tao that come across this term. Therefore, it would be better to use myriad. And please note, in this context, the term refers to all living things. As I mentioned, it can be different. Depending on the context, it can mean all things, period, organic and inorganic. It can mean not just the animals and plants, which is all living things in nature, including humans, because we're animals too. It can include inorganic things, the rocks, the pebbles, the streams, the man-made objects, buildings, houses, bridges, and so on. And I mentioned this is one of the most frequently used terms in the Tao Te Ching. Prior to this point, Tao Te Ching 16, the term has already appeared in Tao Te Ching chapters 1, 2, 4, 5, and 8. When you look at the totality of the Tao Te Ching, the term is used 20 times. So no wonder people think of it as a significant term in the Tao, because it is. Next slide. So what does Lao Tzu say is his observation of the myriad things? In his observation, Lao Tzu noted how active the living things were. The activities occurred in profusion. There's so much of it. There's a lot of flourishing. And when it's not just Lao Tzu, when anyone engages in communion with nature in this manner, there are certain things we can feel. For instance, we can feel the balance underlying all the activities of the myriad things that we observe. And when it comes to balance, what happens if we, human beings, fail to understand the balance? We know from human history, we have seen how ecological disasters can occur when, as an example, human beings hunt a species to extinction, or perhaps destroy their natural habitat, upsetting the local ecological balance. We have seen the damage that can be inadvertently caused by ignorance. And observing nature, keeping in mind the balance, the harmony, we feel a sense of gratitude. In fact, the more we study nature, the greater, I think, our appreciation can be. And speaking for myself, just as an example, I personally have come to feel strongly that animals are people too. By that, I mean animals know what's going on. They can sense your intentions. They react accordingly. They know you mean well, or if you mean ill. They sense the positive and negative energies that you bring to the table. They can tell when you are kind or mean to them. And when I talk about animals, I'm not just referring to common pets like dogs and cats. I literally mean all animals. They all possess sentience to varying degrees of awareness. And so the more I see that, the more I'm grateful for the abundance and the beauty of it all. I feel lucky to be part of it. And that's my next point. We're all part of it. We're all part of the myriad of things. We're not apart from them. I want to emphasize this because sometimes I do notice people speaking of humans and the myriad of things as separate. Us versus them. I think it can be very helpful to look at, for instance, the scientific perspective on how much DNA we share with various living things. So with chimpanzees, as an example, it's 98.8% of DNA that we share with them. Even those animals that we think are not so similar to us, I just read that even dolphins share about 80% of their DNA with human beings. You know, it's no wonder I like them so much. Bottom line, we're all part of nature. We're one part of the many, many living things out there, the myriad things. Next slide. Line 4. I therefore watch their return. This is Lao Tzu talking about himself. The first character that you see there is Wu. Nothing to do with the Wu of Wu Wei. Wu, a different character, same sound. It is the ancient form of I. This is no longer used in modern Mandarin. However, when it comes to historical dramas on television or in movies, one would still be able to hear Wu being used to refer to oneself. And this is one of the sections where Lao Tzu explicitly is talking about himself. As we saw in the previous chapter, Lao Tzu was quite aware that before him, before his time, the masters of antiquity never spoke of themselves, described how they think, how they conducted their work. So in his own writing, Lao Tzu wanted to make sure to inject a note that is more personal, what he did, how he thought, and so on. For him to watch the return of myriad things is to observe the cycles of nature. This line says, I therefore watch their return. It doesn't mean that the animals go away and then come back. It literally means the return trip in the cycle of life, the great circle. The Tao is circular in nature, and this applies to life and death. Everything that comes into being from the Tao must make a return trip back to the Tao. And you and I are no exception to that. This lifetime is but the latest of many round trips that you have made. Every time you go back, every time you return, you shed this outer layer, the body, your identity, the one that you used while you were here, your name, position, the things that you own, your possessions. You retain the core of your being, whether you are returning or coming back to the material world. That is, individual consciousness, the progress you have made in the growth or development of your soul, the deepening of your soul level connections, what we call soulmates or soul companions. So the Tao, again, is circular in that aspect of existence as well. And sages also observe that among humans, when we interact with one another, we create karmic connections. We resolve karmic debts. We incur karmic obligations. Those also tend to work in circular fashion. So with the Tao, one cannot get away from the many circles. Next, let's go to line 5. Everything flourishes. Each returns to its root. So, looking at the first character, Yun, it means flourishing. It is repeated twice because it is emphasized. It means growing in profusion. It is flourishing, and there is a lot of it. So here, Lao Tzu is noting all the living things that thrive in nature. Then the sentence that follows, everything flourishes, and then each returns to its root. The root, in this case, is the Tao, because existence itself is rooted in the Tao. The Tao is the source. All living things eventually return to their point of origin upon death. And this applies not just to living things, but also to people, events, situations, etc. The easiest way to see the circular working of the Tao, the cycles of life and death, is to look at plants. Because plants, well, flower, give off fruits, there are seeds, there's growth when you plant the seeds. Every stage of the cycle for plants makes it abundantly clear that life and death are inextricably connected. So what I would like to do is to use that to summarize what Lao Tzu calls observation, 观. Starting out with, in tranquility, the sage observes the cycles of nature. The graphic that you see here, the falling leaves of autumn, we all know that fall foliage. Autumn time comes, the leaves fall from the trees. For each leaf, it is a literal return to the root. I say that because the fallen leaf eventually disintegrates on the ground into the soil. So whatever water and nutrients it once possessed can now be absorbed by the root of the tree. Literal return to the root. Now, for animals, the same principle applies in a different way. As I said, we also come from a root, just not like the plants, but a more metaphysical root that we refer to as the Tao. And therefore, when the leaf, that is you, falls from the tree, life has come to an end. Your body decomposes just like the leaf disintegrates on the ground to be absorbed into the soil and then goes into the root. As I mentioned, human beings are part of the myriad things. We cannot be apart from it. Therefore, we also return to our root, which is the Tao itself. So these are concepts that have been reiterated multiple times. I thought that it would be helpful to put them all together in one slide. It makes us all the more appreciative of this line from Lao Tzu. Everything flourishes. Each returns to its root. So the extra insight is that everything actually includes you and me. Next, we go to line 6. Line 6 says, returning to the root is called tranquility. Let's first break down the 4 characters one by one. The first character is to return. Not too many ways to translate that particular character. It is to return or to go back, to revert back. The second character there is the character for root. So there's only one way to translate that. Then the third character, called or is called. And then the last character, tranquility, quietude, silence. Putting all of this together, basically, we get the translation, returning to the root is called tranquility. So variations on that are still valid can be returning to the root, perhaps the source is called tranquility. In the life cycle of plants, the tranquil state is the dormant seed. If you don't do anything with the seed of a plant, nothing happens. Activity begins only when the seed is planted. Then it transitions from the inactive, dormant state to profusion, to flourishing. It begins to grow. In the life cycle of humans, the tranquil state is the Tao as the source. Or you can say that the human soul is the seed of human existence in the mortal realm. And this is how we can tell that when Lao Tzu wrote about the root, he's referring to the Tao for us. And we know returning to the Tao, it means a departure from the material world back to the spiritual realm. It means leaving behind all the temptations, sights and sounds, going back to the tranquil state of the immaterial Tao. It is tranquil, it is quiet, it is peaceful. This is not a concept that's alien to our way of thinking. This is rather common for all of humanity. In the West, when we talk about someone who has passed on, we say, rest in peace. May he rest in peace. May she rest in peace. It is the same mindset. Once you have passed on, you don't need to worry about all the frantic struggles of the material world. This is just one of the many reasons that the sages teach there is nothing that we need to fear about death. Next, we go to line 7. Line 7 says, tranquility is called returning to one's nature. So please note, this line transitions from the myriad things to human beings. It is also a transition from nature, as in the natural world, transitioning from that nature to the nature, the actuality of a human being. So I want to point out specifically the last character there, Ming. So typically, when this character is used, it means life, or it can mean fate, like 命运. So these are used all the time in modern Mandarin. The tangential meaning is that the ancients believed in a direct connection between your true nature and your fate. In this ancient context, it is referring to one's true nature rather than your life. So what the ancients thought, which is very true, is that who you are determines the life you will live. Another way to say that is your true nature determines the life that will unfold in front of you. So if you wish to improve your life, you must start by improving your nature, your essential nature. And when I say essential nature, your most essential self, the true self, who you really are. And of course, I mean this to be well beyond your physical body, your social identity. It is that which remains after you peel back all the external layers that are associated with the self. Your name, position, your reputation, your status, your net worth, and so on. So when we talk about this, the true nature, we are really talking about the return to pure consciousness, individual consciousness, that is the real you. Next, returning to one's nature is called constancy. I want to again focus on the last character there, Chang. This character points to the unchanging, eternal constancy of the Tao in this context. What it means is that you are eternally constant in your most fundamental state. I say that because you are connected to the Tao, just as the Tao is connected to you. You're part of the Tao, just as the Tao is part of you. Now, in this state, in your original state as a spiritual entity, you're able to experience eternity directly, direct experience. of eternity. Let me explain what I mean by that. In the physical state, you and I, right here and now, we experience time as duration. How many minutes? How many hours? In the spiritual state, we experience the timeless, where time, duration, loses meaning. And once in a while, we can catch a glimpse of this right here in the material world when you and I connect with something or someone at the most fundamental level. You know the feeling as well as I do. For example, when you are working on something that is meaningful to you, hours can pass without you being aware of it. It's because you made that connection in the Tao. In a similar way, when you have a great conversation with a good friend, same thing. Hours can pass without you being aware of it. So for a while, you felt what we called timelessness. That's what it's like when you are not bound by the material world. So the defining characteristic of spirituality, timelessness. Next, line 9. Knowing constancy is called clarity. Like the other lines, this requires some explanation. And here I want to focus first on the first two characters. The first character there is know. To know something, knowledge, to understand something. The second character there is 常, which means constant. So to know the constant is to know or understand the eternally constant Tao. And the last character that we have there, Ming. The third character is called. So to know constancy is called Ming, which means clarity or clear. Sometimes it is mistranslated as bright. But the meaning is actually clear or clarity. And in this context, the clarity that it's talking about, that is pointing to, is the clarity of wisdom, the clarity of enlightenment, or enlightened wisdom. So Lao Tzu is making this connection between knowing the Tao to being spiritually enlightened. So in this slide, we're talking about this important concept, knowing constancy. Knowing constancy is called clarity. Specifically, it's about spiritual clarity. So we now have enough information to summarize this part of the insights that Lao Tzu has gained from his detached observation. So the character for clarity, Ming, and the clarity that we have about life and death is that when the time comes, we also return to the root. The realization is that life will, sooner or later, come to an end. Just like the inevitability of seasonal changes. And that's another reason why I use the imagery of the falling leaves of autumn. It is a return to our true nature as spiritual beings, the soul, if you will. And this return to the Tao puts everything into a clearer perspective. In that perspective, there is acceptance. We accept that life will come to an end. You and I may struggle to fight against it, fight against the dying of the light. But then we have to, at some point, accept that it will happen sooner or later for all of us. That acceptance can be spiritually liberating. It frees us to live more fully and with purpose. We shift away from excess to moderation. That is to say, we naturally transition away from short-term gratification, living like there's no tomorrow, to a more long-term, more mature and patient perspective. We also shift away from our various pursuits to contentment, that we have enough. When we view ourselves as eternal beings, we're much more likely to make choices that are aligned with our higher principles rather than being driven by fleeting impulses or excessive indulgence. And this is why Lao Tzu wrote, knowing constancy is called clarity. At this point, we have sufficient information on the cultivational approach of Lao Tzu, how he attains a detached frame of mind, makes observations, and gains insights. We can summarize that process and learn from it. In this slide, this is the internal cultivation of the Tao, representing by a sage observing the autumn leaves. First, returning to the root, the realization we too must go back to our source, the Tao. As Lao Tzu observed the natural world, he watched the myriad things being active, and he noted how each one must eventually return to its roots. And I represent this with falling leaves and the observation thereof, but the same principle applies to all living things, including you and me. Then we have be tranquil. That is, away from the chaos of the material world. That is, when we pass on, we make the transition away from the cacophony, the noise of this world. Then, return to your nature. The truth is, in reality, you are a spiritual being. That is when it dawns on some people that there is so much more to existence than what we can perceive with our physical senses. And the fortunate ones among us already have that realization that we are much more than this physical body that we happen to inhabit at the moment. The eternal existence that we have is as pure consciousness. So no constancy is clarity. Understanding the eternal Tao leads you to that clarity. This is the Tao, eternally constant, eternally unchanging. So this represents the insights gained by Lao Tzu for his internal cultivation as he makes his observations about the natural world. Let's continue on. Line 10. Line 10 says, not knowing constancy, one recklessly causes trouble. So we'll do this in two parts. In the first half of it, not knowing constancy, 不知常. So basically, without this spiritual clarity from knowing constancy, knowing the Tao, one cannot know the meaning, the principles of the Tao teachings. And without the understanding, there is no awareness of one's true nature. So this is not referring to us. This is referring to people who have not been exposed to Tao teachings. So for them, without the awareness, there is no realization that we must all return. And I do see this in the people around me sometimes. Often, I think that they assume they will continue on as they are indefinitely. Intellectually, they know they cannot live forever. Emotionally, they cannot accept that it comes to an end. So no true realization for them. And without that realization, there's no tranquility or peace of mind, because the fear of death is constantly going to be in the background. So this is touching upon true nature. On the surface level, seems like we're human beings who sometimes experience spirituality. But the deeper truth is that we are, in fact, spiritual beings having a human experience in this material manifestation. The second half of this line, about recklessly causing trouble. The lack of understanding and awareness lead to problems in life. In Buddhism, in Buddhist teachings, this is expressed as suffering or dukkha. Dukkha is the original term that means a dissatisfaction. It can mean suffering in terms of physical pain, but more often it's about things not being totally satisfactory. Dissatisfaction of craving, wanting things, clinging, having attachments, grasping, trying to get more, especially to the impermanent, to the transient, to things that come and go and cannot last. Dukkha, or suffering, is also the negativity of being ignorant, of being unaware, and the consequence of that ignorance, that lack of awareness. And one more, the delusional pursuits that leads nowhere and leaves one empty. So this is not all-inclusive. There's more to dukkha than I have provided here, but I think this will give you a flavor of the Buddhist concept. Next, line 11. Knowing constancy is acceptance. This is to say, one who knows the Tao is naturally accepting and understanding. This is because when you know the Tao, you realize that the Tao encompasses everything, including all the diversity and variations that we find in the world. And in a practical sense, as we go through our lives, we know the differences, variations, diversity, it can mean different opinions, even opposing or clashing opinions. Now, I know that many would see this as a negative, but as a Tao cultivator, one would see this as a plus and not a minus. And the reason is because it takes more than one perspective to truly understand a situation. Tao cultivators would prefer to look at various perspectives and not condemn them. It sounds simple, but think about how frequently we come across people condemning different perspectives other than their own. If it's not in agreement with what they already believe, it must be wrong, even evil. Knowing the Tao increases one's self-awareness and self-knowledge. And seeing things clearly will make you accept reality as it is. This in turn means you can look at the world in a more objective way, without complaints, without anger. It means you can start doing something about the issues that you have noted, that you can take charge of your life. Next, line 12. Acceptance is impartiality. This means one who can accept different perspectives has the ability to be impartial. When we talk about this in the context of an ancient kingdom, it's at the ruler level. It means treating the subjects fairly according to the established laws of the land. In a person like you and me, we're not kings and queens, but we do have our little world over which to rule. And when it comes to being impartial, this means being the voice of reason for the people around you. Probably you and I know someone like that in our lives. That is, someone who really has his or her act together, seen as having this maturity of experience, is wiser than the rest of us. It is the person that people go to for advice. And this can be very helpful in crafting solutions and bringing people together. So the realization here is that as you and I study the Tao, you or me, all of us, we can be that person. The person who really has his or her act together, the voice of reason, the one with the maturity of experience that people will go to for advice. Next, line 13. Impartiality is sovereign. So the last character there, Wang, means the king or the ruler, here translated as sovereign. And this is because one who is seen as fair-minded naturally takes on leadership role. It may not be obvious that it's a leadership role, but the person definitely has greater influence on the others. As a ruler, it means establishing a reputation as a respected sovereign. In a person, it means people look to you for dispute resolution. So this is a further extension of the previous line. People all naturally prefer to follow somebody like that. If there's a disagreement, they go to such a person. They feel that this person has the judgment, the sound judgment, to be able to help them out and to sort things out. Therefore, the context of this line extends beyond kings and emperors. It can be various kinds of leadership, even those that we don't specifically identify as leaders. An example, in education, we have teachers. In a family, we have parents, and so on. Next, line 14. Sovereign is heaven. And sovereign, to be sovereign in this context, the sovereignty is the mastery of one's kingdom or one's life, one's world. Heaven, in this case, is simply the heavenly Tao. So in the Tao Te Ching, there's a line that talks about how when you follow the Tao correctly, people follow of their own free will. When the Tao is used correctly, everything falls into place. People follow by themselves. It seems like there's no effort. Everything is unforced, and that's what makes it aligned with the heavenly Tao. I mentioned education, I mentioned family, where teachers and parents can play that role. But there are many other settings involving groups of people, groups of human beings. So we can extend the same principle to all of them. Perhaps a community, a neighborhood, an organization like a company, perhaps the church, the temple, the list goes on and on. So all of it is about being sovereign, living up to the heavenly mandate for human beings, being congruent with what is natural for the best in you. And when you have this alignment, you possess authentic power. Next, we go to line 15. Line 15 says, heaven is Tao. 天乃道. In this context, heaven and Tao are synonyms. Thus, heavenly Tao. That's a often used expression in the Tao Te Ching. So Laozi is being very specific here. When he's talking about the Tao, he's addressing, pointing to, referring to the positive aspects of life that promote the welfare of human beings. Hence, the heavenly Tao is heavenly. It's good. It's a good thing. So he's referring to that rather than the Tao of absolutely everything, both good and bad. Good and bad being human judgments that are transient, because good may turn out to be bad and vice versa. So here, Laozi is talking about love, friendship, kindness, compassion, virtues, and so on. Those are what he meant by the heavenly Tao. And then line 16, Tao is eternal. The Tao is everlasting. So that means everything that lasts is congruent with the Tao, that take on the characteristics of the Tao, including its lasting nature. Conversely, things that do not last, things that come and go, things that are transient, are contrary to the Tao. And this is the reason why we say that the transience of the material world cannot be the heavenly Tao. That the Tao would give us a different perspective so that we can handle the material world in a better way. So now we have sufficient information to see how Laozi applied the insights that he gained from observing nature to his everyday life in dealing with people. This is something that we can summarize in the following slide. Previously, we looked at the internal cultivation of the Tao. We switch gears now to look at the external application of the Tao. This starts with acceptance, being able to accommodate differences in opinions, people who are not like you. Understanding the Tao makes you a more accepting, accommodating, and tolerant person. And even when you cannot agree with the other person, you can still see where they are coming from. And it doesn't mean that you have to give up on your principles. It just means you have a handle on it. You have a handle on the disagreement. Then, impartiality. This is to be detached from biases and favorites, like the Tao itself. This is to be more fair, more objective. And this is due to your ability to see the various perspectives that are out there. It makes you better able to assess what is the objective truth. You are not constrained by a limited view of the truth based on personal preferences and biases. Just because it appears one way from one angle, that doesn't mean it's the whole story. Then we have sovereign, to take charge of the kingdom that is your life. In other words, to have sovereignty in your life means to assert your birthright to take control. Starting with your mind, mastery over that, extending to your environment, your little corner of the world. So all of this leads to heavenly Tao, to live in alignment with the Tao of heaven. This is the life that is simple yet joyous, that is without strife. Everything is smooth and graceful, and a lot of fun, perhaps more importantly. Next, we come to the last line, line 17 of Tao Te Ching 16. Line 17 says, the self is no more, without danger. So this should be explained as well. The self is no more refers to the death of the physical body. As Lao Tzu pointed out, this is the return to the roots, the source, or the Tao. And what about the reference to danger, which is the last character that you see there? Danger refers to the many pitfalls and hazards that we encounter in life. So life journey itself is rarely ever smooth sailing all the way through. We, a lot of times, will come across blockages, obstacles, traps. So to be able to live in accordance with the heavenly Tao is living life in the best possible way with no problems. And as I mentioned, it is a life that is smooth, graceful, meaningful, and full of joy. And at this point, we have sufficient information to bring together the internal cultivation and the external application. And now I think you're going to be able to see why I presented the internal and the external in different ways. It is because of this slide where I want to bring them together. So to reiterate through the process that Lao Tzu went through, and repetition, of course, is the mother of skill. As Lao Tzu emptied his mind and observed nature from a detached frame, he noted the myriad things and how they each return to the root. His realization in his internal cultivation is that we're no different. We too must go back to the source, the Tao. And noting the change of season, the falling leaves, is another way to talk about how the transition from life to death is like the changing of seasons. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. It may not happen the same way for everyone, but it will happen. That is a certainty. Then Lao Tzu went to tranquility, to be tranquil, to have tranquility away from the chaos of the material world. That is the meaning of passing on, returning to the root, returning to one's true nature. And this is where you are face to face with the reality of the spiritual side, that you are, in fact, not the person you present yourself to be in the world, but the essence that is driving the physical body. So this is about knowing constancy. Another way to say, to know the Tao, the eternal Tao. To understand the eternal is what leads you to clarity. Clarity is spiritual clarity or spiritual enlightenment. And this in turn leads to acceptance. Knowing the Tao, understanding the many different perspectives, many variations that are out there, allows you to become much more understanding, accepting, and accommodating. With that, you can become much more impartial, fair-minded, much more the voice of reason that people turn to, detached from biases and favorites like the Tao. Sovereign. Take charge of the kingdom that is your life. And this is how you can live the heavenly Tao in alignment with the Tao, traversing this path, so that Lao Tzu describes it as the self is no more without danger. What he's trying to say is that you can live out your entire life without encountering any problems or issues, that the totality of your existence while you are here is going to be exactly the way that you want it. It can be the smooth, effortless, happy life that you always wanted. So this one slide summarizes the internal and the external. This encapsulates the insights that Lao Tzu gained from his observations that he decided to share with us. And now we are getting close to the top of the hour, so we should be going to the summary slides for a quick review. Previously, we went through the beginning part of detached observation, and the two things to remember there is that Lao Tzu talked about emptying the mind, the ultimate emptiness, and the truest tranquility, the internal silence. These are preparatory work for thoughtful observations without attachments. And this is to commune with nature. When you do that, you sense the interconnectedness of all living things. You are able to watch the rhythms and cycles that exist out in nature. You can connect with the balance and harmony, feeling gratitude. And this can make you more patient, more mindful. We can learn to slow down, to appreciate the present moment. And when we observe nature's ability to adapt and thrive, even in challenging conditions, that can inspire resilience in our own lives. And the balance and harmony that we see, that we witness in nature, it can inspire us to seek balance in our own lives. We can take all of this and we can also apply them. You don't need to be out in nature. You can be looking at human beings because you and I, all people, we're part of nature too. We're among the myriad things. Therefore, we can also observe people without attachments and note the circular workings of karmic connections, how events and situations have a beginning and an end, and circular causes and effects happening all around. The interactions that we can observe are like the activities of the myriad things. And the insights that we gain is similar to when we commune with nature. We can note how people can be so different in the way they approach life, but then we can learn from their experience. We can also learn to be more patient and tolerant to those who are not like us. And by seeing how some people manage to overcome challenges in their lives, they can inspire us to become better, more resilient ourselves. All of this can lead to gratitude in us. We can learn that from people just as we can from nature. So this is the first half of this chapter, to observe nature and gain insights. And then we go from nature to nature. We go from the natural world to human nature, to the true nature of human beings. And we begin with internal cultivation. Lao Tzu made the connection from the natural world to true nature, the nature of you and me. And Lao Tzu wants us to consider the meaning of the eternal Tao as it applies to everybody. And finally, Lao Tzu talks about how, based on this understanding, he says, knowing constancy is clarity. It is the attainment of spiritual clarity. The internal cultivation that Lao Tzu spoke of led to external application of the Tao. Specifically, it's the application of the understanding of the eternal Tao that encompasses all. It makes one naturally accepting and accommodating, and the reminder there is that one can also be more honorable and equitable in all dealings, without bias, without playing favorites, to be impartial. And lastly, this all leads to taking charge, assuming command of your private kingdom. And what I mean by private kingdom is just your life, your world. What Lao Tzu would like is what we all want, and that is to live the best life in the Tao, to be able to savor every moment. Our meeting has come to an end, but the journey continues on. Until next time, may the Tao fill you with peace and happiness.